All right, so let's get started. We are today beginning chapter 18. If you recall, we did chapter 17 last week, and we learned about this fellow, Micah, whose mother gives him money, and instead money that really was supposed to be for some holy use, but instead he takes the money and he makes an idol, and he creates a temple, essentially. And he even gets this fellow who's a Levite, and he turns him into a priest. That is bad enough. And what we also discussed was how in this temple, or Micah and his mother, and the way they talk, they're very mixed up there, because they're serving God, they're serving a pagan, idol. It's kind of all mixed together. And so we already get a sense that this is a negative influence that they're absorbing from their surroundings, that they're, as the nation of Israel, have this faith in God and a way of worshiping God, and yet they've picked up this other stuff from around them. And we noted at the end of the class something interesting, and that is the amount of money. There's 1,100 silver pieces, and we noted that it was exactly the same amount of money, 1,100 silver pieces, that Delilah received from the Philistines in order to betray, when she betrayed Samson. And I'm going to come back to that. But first, I want to start with the beginning of chapter 18, which is a continuation of the Micah, the Micah idol temple story. And here we open with, once again, we have this statement. Well, it will actually be the first time we have it in this story. We're going to see twice the statement of, in those days there was no king. And here it shows up in this story, okay, right here at the beginning of chapter 18. In those days there was no king of Israel. And then we have a continuation, as if it's an example. And in those days, the tribe of Dan was seeking a territory in which to settle, for to that day, no territory had fallen to their lot among the tribes of Israel. So this, in and of itself, is, creates a question. What do you mean? How is it possible that you have an entire tribe that never got its land? Now, if you go back to Joshua chapter 19. Joshua chapter 19. I'm always going through two books at the same time, the Hebrew one, the English one, whatever. Joshua 19 verse 40. This is a chapter 19, talks about all the different territories and how they were by lot, and it was kind of like a prophetic process that went on here, how the land was divided into the different territories for each tribe. And we see in verse 40, the seventh lot fell to the tribe of the Danites, Dan, by their clans. Their allotted territory comprised Sorah, Eshtaol, and Ir Shemesh, the city of Shemesh, okay? Shalabim, Ayalon, Itla, Elon, Timnata, Ekron, Eltekah, Gibton, and Baalat, Yehud, Bnei Brak, Gat Rimon, and also the seas of the Yarkon, which is a river that flows into the Mediterranean Sea right in the middle of Tel Aviv of today. One second, at the border near Jaffa, okay? So I am now going to open a map and see if I can do this right. Okay, I'm going to open a map now, and you can see what we're talking about here. 1 second, I'm just trying to go back to what I was doing. Right. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Wrong. Stop share. I'm going back to the share. Somehow I lost the share I wanted to share. All right, I'll use this one. It's not the map I wanted, but it's good enough. Okay, here we go. The same basic information is in this map. You see here is Dan, is this strip of land. You see here Jaffa. Okay, this is Tel Aviv of today. It's interesting. What's good about this map is the fact that it kind of is superimposed on the cities as we know them today. So here you see Tel Aviv and Jaffa. This is biblical Jaffa. And we learned from Joshua that's one edge of their territory. They have actually an entrance to the sea here at Jaffa. And then it comes along here and it ends up at the eastern edge, bordering on Judah and Benjamin. And you see here the modern city of Beit Shemesh, that is considered to be parallel to this Ir Shemesh that they mention here. They also mention Ekron. Now, Ekron is here, as you can see that. This is Ekron, okay? And it's very close to Gat here. Now, one of the things that we will see later on when we talk about the Philistines is that the Philistines are going to really be centered in this area. These are considered the Philistine cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gat, okay? This area is Philistine area, okay? But when we read here in Joshua, there are no Philistines here yet. That's something that happens much later, as we see in Samson. Samson is really the point at which the Philistines really become a serious threat for the first time. But what happens next? We're continuing in Joshua 19. But the territory of the Danites slipped from their grasp, so the Danites migrated and made war on Leshem. Okay, let's see where that is. They captured it and put it to the sword. They took possession of it and settled in it. And they changed the name of Leshem to Dan after their ancestor Dan. That was the portion of the tribe of the Danites by their clans, those towns and their villages. So in other words, Dan starts here and ends up going all the way up here. Now, okay, here is the city of Dan, right here. That city, the Bible tells us, was once called Leshem. And the people from Dan came from here, went all the way up here, captured the city, and settled here, okay? So this is quite an odd situation that there's first this territory, doesn't suit them, and they come up here. Now I'm gonna make it a little bit more complicated, because if we go look in Deuteronomy chapter 33, this is the blessings that Moses gives to all the tribes. And here's one little verse on Dan. Dan is a very small tribe, so they get only one little verse, verse 22. And it says, and of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp that leaps forth from Bashan. Now, Bashan is a biblical name for the Golan. So if you see, Dan is here. Bashan is this area here. This is the Golan Heights, okay? So this tells us that Dan, even in Moses' time, Moses talked about Dan coming from this area. And yet we see that the territory actually given to Dan during Joshua's time is here. What makes it even more complicated is we are now going back to our chapter in Judges. In chapter 18, we learn that they had not really had a they didn't have a territory. And the story then begins to talk about sending representatives from this area, from Dan, which is near Soran Eshtaol, up to the north. They're going to scout out an area. They're going to come back to their tribe in Dan, and they're going to say, this is the area we want, okay? And they're going to go up there, and they're going to capture it. So one of the questions that arises is, when did this really happen? This is already written in the book of Joshua, that they got this territory down here, and they went up and captured Dan. Most commentaries believe that for a number of reasons, and we highlighted some of those reasons last week, and we're going to see it as we move along. Most commentators believe that beginning with chapter 17, these stories, the two main stories that are here from 17 to the end of the book, happened earlier, but they're placed at the end of the book, okay? And this is one of the major proofs or major reasons why they believe it happened earlier, because of the fact that this is already written in the book of Joshua, that they went up and looked for a place to settle, and they settled up in the Dan. It also makes sense because the time of the book of Judges lasts almost 400 years. So if you have a verse in chapter 18 that says they didn't have a territory, a tribe cannot sustain itself for 400 years without a territory. They can deal with this issue for a certain amount of time, maybe a few decades, but it certainly is not something that they can sustain for 400 years without having a proper territory and then all of a sudden going up to the north. It doesn't say they had a territory and then they got pushed out of the territory. It said they never succeeded in settling in the territory. We have that same idea both here in chapter 18 and going back to Joshua chapter 19, that it didn't work, okay? And we get a sense, this is before the Philistine times, because if you look at, no, it's not here, but there is another place, I don't remember where it is, where it does talk about that it's the people that are pushing them here are not the Philistines, but the Amorites. Okay, so again, during at the end of the book of Judges, the people who are here are already the Philistines. Now, what does that tell us then about what happened in the story of Samson and Delilah? Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky. Samson and Delilah, we know that Samson is born he's from the tribe of Dan, and he lives between Sorah and Eshtaol, okay, which is this classic area of Dan over here, okay? Sorah and Eshtaol, and that's why I wanted the other map, and I wish I could find it. How do I find it? Okay, let me see if I can, I know what I need to do. Wait, hold on 1 second, and I know how to do this. Here we go. Oh. Okay, can you see this? Can you see this other film, this other map that I have?
Not yet. You're gonna unshare and then reshare.
Unshare, here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, you see it now?
Now we can see.
Yes.
Okay, good. So if you see here on this map, you see here, this is Bethlehem, this is Hebron, Beit Shemesh is right here, and Sorah and Eshtaol is around here. This also doesn't say by name, but it is here. Okay, right where, see what it says Yarmouth over there? It's in this area, Sorah and Eshtaol. It's basically right at the edge of Dan, between Dan and Judah. Okay, it's this area over here. And that's where Samson is born. And he's from a Dan family. Now, there's no question, Samson is towards the end of the book of Judges, okay? If indeed Dan had already moved up to the north, and that also, this is easier. This says the Bashan, this is Dan, you're talking about this area, okay? If they'd already moved to the north, how is it that Samson is still down here? Okay, so that would support perhaps those who say, no, this whole situation of going up north happened after Samson. During Samson's time, the entire tribe of Dan is still down south. And that is still certainly a way of looking at it. It's a legitimate way of looking at it, but I want to try to solve the problem if we take the position, which seems to make more sense in light of what we see in the book of Joshua in particular. How is it that, Samson is born here in Dan, is still down in the southern part of Dan, not in the northern part of Dan? And I would have to just say, well, they didn't all go up to the north. That some of the families of Dan stayed down south. And I find support for this if I go back to what we know about Samson, and I'm going to look at two particular places. Okay, if we go back to chapter 15. Okay. Chapter 15, verse 9. The Philistines came up, pitched camp in Judah, and spread out over Lehi. The men of Judah asked, why have you come up against us? They answered, we have come to take Samson prisoner and to do to him as he did to us. Thereupon 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave of the rock of Etam. They said to Samson, and continues. We studied this already. What is going on here? The dialogue here between the Philistines and the, shall we say, the tribe under whose umbrella comes Samson is Judah. There is no dialogue here with a tribe of Dan. And I think this supports the idea that the tribe of Dan as a tribe was gone. There were a few individual families that left, and therefore they were not under the elders of Dan anymore, because the elders of Dan had already moved north. They were the elders of Judah. And therefore this whole dialogue between the Philistines and Judah about, will the people of Judah give over Samson? And, of course, Samson does this as a trick. And he says to them, fine, I will reply to you, just don't hurt me. You see that there's a relationship there between Judah and Samson. And it is Judah that the Philistines turn to give up Samson. There's no mention of the elders of Dan. And so that, I believe, is therefore consistent with the idea that there is no tribal organization, no tribal elders of Dan down south. They've all moved north already. Okay. So all this goes to say that when we're back in chapter 18, we are looking at something that actually happened way at the beginning of the period of Judges. And that at the point at which, and this is out of order. These chapters are written out of order. And we will again talk about why it's out of order later on. But one of the things that I think in general, the last 4 chapters are out of order for a reason that talks about it in a way it kind of typifies. It's kind of, let us close the book of Judges with 2 stories that typifies everything that's wrong with the period of Judges from the beginning of the period to the end. Even though we had ups and downs, if we look at the whole period, and we discussed this a bit last week, no king of Israel, all the problems that happen, even if there's some good periods, it's a very difficult period. And therefore these stories, even though they may have occurred at the beginning of the book, are selected to typify what the period of Judges was all about as a sort of conclusion, conclusory message at the end of the book. But I also think it's very, very significant that this story of Micah is the one that immediately follows the story of Samson and Delilah. So the whole analysis that we just did now, basically, what does it tell us about Samson and his family? Not just that they're connected to Judah, but that unlike the rest of Dan, who are up in the north, and what's going on up in the north, we're going to read about it, all around this idol, this temple. There's a temple up in the north in the tribe of Dan that is a temple of idol worship, okay? Samson and his family are not part of that. They did not follow the rest of the tribe of north. They stayed in the south. So this says something very positive. And the fact that God goes and chooses this family, Manoah and his wife, chooses Samson, says something about this. While they are in tribe of Dan, they're different from the rest of Dan. They were able to perhaps withstand the negative influences that must have been brought to bear upon them from their tribe. They didn't follow the rest of the tribe of north. They stayed further south. They attached themselves more closely to Judah. Maybe this was a more righteous tribe. Maybe this was a better place to be. Certainly are separating themselves from Micah. So that also, I think, is something that by putting these 2 stories together, it helps us contrast the Dan people that we're going to encounter in the Micah story from the Dan people that are Samson's family. Okay? But let's go back to that amount of money. Okay, so Delilah has this amount of money that she gets as a reward for betraying Samson. But it's not just her reward. What does that whole transaction tell us? Samson had no business going to Delilah in the first place. And when we were talking about Samson and we looked at how he had this weakness for women, that he followed his eyes were always looking at the women. He had no business being with Delilah. By the time he goes with Delilah, and we of course analyzed this all before, by the time he goes with Delilah, ends up being completely under her thumb. And that she is able, therefore, to convince him because she pleads with him and she has such influence on him that he ends up giving, giving up his secret. He's captured, he's tortured, and all that. And so this 1,100 pieces of silver represents Samson's giving into his surroundings, going after a woman who's a Philistine, who he had no business going with. It symbolizes his submission to these negative influences that surround him. When he starts out, he's going to go into the Philistines and he's going to, kind of pretend he's one of them in order to attack them. By the time we get to Delilah, he can no longer keep himself separate, but he submits to her influences. Okay, now let's look at the money that we saw last week that Micah's mother has. This is money that initially she wants for a holy purpose, okay? And yet in the end, it ends up being an idol. And we see too with the whole dialogue between Micah and his mother, when they're talking about a combination of worshiping God, and yet here's this idol in the middle of a temple. They're worshiping God with this idol. It's all messed up. It's all confused. What it tells us more than anything, these people are Israelites. They're not Philistines. They're not Canaanites. But like Samson, they have allowed the pagan influences that surround them to influence them. And one of the best examples of this is this temple of Micah and his idol, where everything is all confused. Everything is just such a mess, okay? So I think both of these things, both of these stories that are connected thematically through this vehicle of the same amount of money, okay, tells us very much about the period of time we're in. A period of time already from the beginning of the Judges tells us that they did not succeed in getting rid of all these nations. So on top of the Canaanite nations that they're dealing with, we get the Midianites from the east, we get the Philistines coming in from the west that become a serious problem. And it's not just that they persecute them, it's that they influence them. And this is what we are going to be seeing very much so in the end of Judges with all these things. Okay. Now let's go back to, okay, all right, so let's go back to our story in chapter 18. The Danites sent out, we're in verse 2, the Danites sent out 5 of their number from their clan seat at Zorah and Eshtaol, valiant men, to spy out the land and explore it. Go, they told them, and explore the land. When they advanced into the hill country of Ephraim as far as the house of Micah, they stopped there for the night. While in the area of Micah's house, they recognized the speech of the young Levite. So they went over and asked him, what brought you to these parts? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here? Now, what do you mean they recognized his speech? We learned that the Levites, this Levite actually came from a family of Judah. And we said before that Zorah and Eshtaol is really adjacent to Judah. So chances are what they do is they recognize maybe his accent, something about him, maybe they even knew him. And they realize, what is he doing here? This is a guy that comes from our neighborhood. What is he doing here in the hill country of Ephraim? And then he tells him about, and of course, this is a man who's done very well by Micah. The Micah we meet here is actually, he's a kind and nice man. He worships God, and he's probably, doesn't understand, I don't know, he worships a God in a very weird way. He thinks a priest is something you buy. Okay, but he's not a violent man. He's not an evil man. And in fact, this Levite's very happy because he's doing well. He installed him as a priest. He's giving him a good salary. Okay, so he tells him the story, what is good and everything like that. And they said to him, verse 5, please inquire of God. We would like to know if the mission on which we are going to be successful. So they want him to, and again, this is very interesting because we know that the high priest who is in Shiloh at this time, he has a breastplate, and through that, they receive messages from God. We're going to see in our next story that this very same thing happens in the story of the war between the Benjamites. When they inquire of God, are they going to be successful in their war? Here too, the Danites want to know, are we going to be successful in our war as we go, or in our mission? They're not going to war yet. In our mission to scout out the north. And the priest says to him, go in peace. The Lord views with favor the mission you are going on. Now, did he really inquire? Was there really a message? Who knows? Doesn't seem like it, but who knows? He's certainly playing the good game, this priest. But anyway, the 5 men, they go up to Laish. Now notice that in the book of Joshua, it's called Leshem. that Leshem became Dan. Here we're going to using the name Laish became Dan. It is the same place. And we see that very often, that names usually take on different versions. It could be that this name is more based. We learn that this was a place that used to belong to the people of Sidon. It could be that Laish is the way the Sidonites pronounce that name, and it could be Leshem is more the way the Canaanites or the Israelites would pronounce that name, but it's definitely the same place. Okay, so they went and they spotted out and they said, oh, looks good. And what did they notice? They said, the people who live there are actually Sidonites. It says they're tranquil and unsuspecting people with no one in the land to molest them and with no hereditary ruler. Moreover, they were distant from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anybody. What did they discover? This city of Dan is like a little bubble, okay? It's full of people from Sidon, but they're very far from Sidon. And there's nowhere nearby that could come to their defense in the event that they're attacked. Of course, this is a very important piece of information for people that want to attack and conquer this area. So they go back down and they tell the Dan people from, Tzara Neshta, oh, it's a great place. It's going to be easier to conquer. Let's go. Okay, so they go. Who goes? An army, not the whole tribe. First, they have to go conquer the area. Then they're going to come back and move up there. So an army goes out, okay? 600 men, that's in verse 11. And they go up, they stop along the way in a few different places, okay? And then they go back through, they're going north, okay? If we look at this map, they're starting from here, all right? And they're going north through here, up, and all the way to the north, okay? Now, they come there and they again go to Micah. 14. Here are the 5 men who had gone to spy out the Laish region and remarked to their kinsmen, do you know there's an ephod in these houses and teraphim and a sculptured image and a molten image? Now you know what you have to do. What does he mean, you know what you have to do? They're telling him, we can steal this stuff, okay? So they turned off there and entered the home of the young Levite at Micah's house and greeted him. The 600 Danite men, girt with their weapons of war, stood at the entrance of the gate, while the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went inside and took the sculptured image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. The priest was standing at the entrance of the gate, and the 600 men girt with their weapons of war. So, priest, 600 men. How much chance does this priest have of accomplishing anything when he's faced with 600 armed men? The priest said to them, what are you doing? But they said to him, be quiet, put your hand on your mouth, come with us and be our father and priest. Would you rather be a priest to one man's household or be a priest to a tribe and a clan in Israel? The priest was delighted. This is the same priest who becomes a priest even though he's a Levite, because Micah paid him money. What do they say about people? If you can pay him off, if one person can pay you off, anybody can pay you off, okay? There they go, paying him off, and he's delighted. He took the ephod, the household gods, the sculpture image, he joined the people. And then they go, and at some point, Micah says, oh my goodness, what happened? He called out to the Danites who turned around and said to Micah, what's the matter? Why have you mustered? He said, you have taken my priests and the gods that I made and walked off. Okay, he went with his own men to catch up with them. He says, what do I have left? How can you ask? What's the matter? But the Danites replied, don't do any shouting at us, or some desperate men might attack you, and you are in a family where you will lose your lives. So Micah, realizing that they were stronger than he, turned back and went home, and the Danites went on their way, taking the things Micah had made and the priests he had acquired. So you can say, okay, Micah had it coming to him. He had no business building a temple. He had no business building an idol. He had no business paying off a priest. You pay off a priest, the next guy pays him more, you lose your priest. Okay, fine. But then look and see what these Danites are like. They're Micah has done some wrong things and some bad things, no question. But look at what this Danite guys are doing, okay? They proceeded to Laish, a people tranquil and unsuspecting. You see, this is also very, very interesting. Initially, we were told that these people are tranquil and unsuspecting as part of the information that the Dan tribe people, the spies, the 5 people, bring back to the tribe. But here, we're going to see it in a very, very horrible way. And they put them to the sword and burned down the town. There was none to come to the rescue, for it was distant from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone, and lay in the valley of Beit rechov. This is not people that says, we're coming against you, give you a chance to come to peace with us, which is what they're supposed to do, okay? These were not part of the 7 Canaanite nations. These are from Sidon. This is a whole different group of people in the north. They come and they just take in a violent way, and they come against people that really did not, the scripture tells us twice how they are tranquil and unsuspecting. They took advantage of people who were peaceful in nature, and they not just they killed them all, and they burned the entire town down, okay? Then they rebuilt the town. They named it Dan because that's their tribe, okay? Original, however, the name of the town was Laish. And then what happens? The Danites set up the sculptured image for themselves, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Manasseh, and his descendants served as priests to the Danite tribe until the land went into exile. They maintained the sculptured image that Micah had made throughout the time that the house of God stood at Shiloh. So here you have, and we mentioned this last week, that in the Hebrew, where it says Gershom, son of Manasseh, the nun from Manasseh is up, is a little bit raised and smaller, so that there's a hint here that this may even be Gershom, the son of Moshe. And if that's the case, of course, this is just one more reason to date this to the beginning of the period of Judges and not the end of the period of Judges. But what's so interesting here is we have this is a sculptured image that Micah had made, is standing in contrast to the tabernacle at Shiloh. Okay, now there's a beautiful midrash that talks about the smoke that goes up from the pagan altar up at the tabernacle at the temple of Micah, which is actually not Micah's, the tabernacle of the idol of Micah, okay, mixing with the smoke that goes up from the temple, the tabernacle at Shiloh. And it's such a beautiful way of talking about two different temples, both of them, the entire time of the book of Judges. And that's also because it says all the time that the house of the Lord was in Shiloh. That is another reason to say that this is dating to the beginning of the book of Judges, because the tabernacle of Shiloh, we already know it's there from the end of the book of Joshua when they settle at Shiloh. That's what the tabernacle is. So we know that this also is another reason to say this happened at the beginning of the book of Judges and not at the end. So what do we have in the story? We not only have pagan worship, we have horrific violence. And we will say twice here in this story that it says there is no king of Israel. At the beginning, in verse 6, it says there's no king of Israel, and that is referring to the pagan, when that's the beginning of the story, when we learn about Micah creating this idol. And so no king in Israel what is the problem? No king in Israel? They're going to pagan worship. There's no authority that is stopping this, okay? That is, and they're going to pagan worship. In chapter 18, which begins with, in those days, there's no king of Israel, what we have here is two things. Number one, we have a tribe looking for territory, no king. From a political point of view, what do you mean? A bunch of people from a tribe suddenly take upon themselves, they go up, they look for territory, they kill people, there's no central government to say, this is where you should be living, this is your territory, this is your capital. It's a mess. It's also, but what we also see, no king in Israel on this story, is the terrible violence that we're meeting here. And I will just end with one little, two points that I know I've gone over time a bit, but I just want to end with this. First of all, Deuteronomy 12, okay, very, very interesting. Deuteronomy 12 talks about how when the nation enters the land of Israel, they're supposed to set up a temple. And once they set up a temple, it says, look in verse 4. Deuteronomy 12, verse 4. Do not worship the Lord your God in like manner, but look only to the site that the Lord your God will choose amidst all your tribes. Very definite. The pagans worshiped God on every hilltop and near every tree. And here the Bible makes it very clear. When you come to the land of Israel, set up one place of worship. And that is the place that you're supposed to go to, not put things all over the place. What was very, very interesting is in verse, where is it? Okay, I underlined it in the other Bible. Okay, verse 8, okay? It says, don't do this. Okay, verse 8. Back to Deuteronomy. You know, I'm going Hebrew, English. I'm really apologizing. I'm not as organized as I often am. Okay, Deuteronomy 12, verse 8. You shall not act at all as we enacted, every man as he pleases. And in Hebrew, it's the exact same word where it says here, in those days, there's no king of Israel. Each person does as he wishes. In Hebrew, it's exactly the same words as here. So in other words, in Deuteronomy, an expression of what does it mean? Each man as he pleases, worshiping God all over the place. What better way to describe what has happened with this idol of Micah, which he sets up in Ephraim, and then it goes up to Dan, and it is competing against the one central place in Shiloh. And it is a reflection of each person does what he wants. And that's, you know, and I'll just finish with one last note. We're going to hopefully continue when we finish Judges. We're continuing moving into Samuel. Book of Samuel begins with Elkanah going up to Shiloh. And think about this for a second. Those whole first couple chapters, you don't have a sense of a lot of people going to Shiloh. Elkanah and his family and some women. That's it. And in fact, our tradition says that in this period of time, towards the end of the book of Judges, it's not just that there is competition between the temple of Micah and the temple of Shiloh, but that Shiloh has been almost abandoned. So few people go up to Shiloh. Think about that when we read, you know, we're going to discuss this again, and it's almost as if here we are, this is what's going on. The part of the problem, we have pagan worship, we have people abandoning the central place of worship, we have terrible violence, we have anarchy. Okay, that's it for today. Chapter 18, we are going to take up the story with chapter 19 next week. Anyone have comments, want to stay on? I apologize for going too late, but
I have one comment.
Sure.
Comment.
Sure, Claudia.
Looking at the map, you can see that the space that Dan was given was smaller than all of the other tribes. So it can say that they grew to such a number that they had to look for other space. I don't excuse their behavior, but I think maybe that contributed to them going out of the area.
No, but that's not what it says in Joshua, okay? If you go back to Joshua 19, it says here, the territory of the Danites slipped from their grasp. In other words, they were not able to hold on to it. It wasn't that it was too small. And what happens is they're getting squeezed in initially by the Canaanites. And at the time of Samson, they're already squished by the Philistines. But if we accept the idea that it came before the Philistines ever came into the land, then it's the Canaanites who are squishing them out.
Excuse me.
They don't succeed. They don't succeed in holding onto their territory.
Excuse me, Sondra. What was that reference again, please?
Joshua, one second, Joshua 19. Oh, wait, no. Joshua 18. No, I'm looking in Judges. Rega. I have so many bookmarks here. I don't know where I'm coming and where I'm going. Here we go. Here we go. Joshua 19, verse 40 through 48.
Okay.
I'd heard that they went up to Dan because it was much more appealing and beautiful. In fact, you can see an altar, can't you? A pagan altar up in Dan.
Well, yeah. If you go today to Dan, you have, it's very interesting what's up there. You have a wall, you have an altar.
Yeah.
But the idea of it being very beautiful, we see that reflected in our story today in chapter 18, where the people from Dan go back to the southern place and tell them, oh, we found a great place. It's beautiful. It's, for sure. But what we see here for both here in Joshua 19 and in our chapter in Judges, go back to that one. Chapter in Judges, it also says, Dan was seeking a territory in which to settle. For to that they know territory for unto them of the tribes of Israel. Okay, so it's like they need a place, They clearly wanted that place, perhaps, and not someplace else because it was good and fertile and everything. But the reason they left because of a problem. They were being squeezed out of there. Either the way it's written in Judges, they didn't really have a territory allotted to them, but that really doesn't make sense because we know a territory was allotted to them. I think what it comes to say in chapter 18 in Judges is it was allotted to them, but they didn't manage to realize the territory that had been allotted to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. So thank you all for joining us today. It was wonderful to see everybody, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sondra.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sondra.
Bye.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.